Good afternoon, Stanley.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you to Media Impact Funders for having us today. And Stanley, it's great to be in conversation with you as always. Congrats on this new film.
Thank you so much. None of it has ever been seen by anybody that didn't work on it. So this is going to be the first showing of it in any way. So be kind.
Before we jump into the conversation, why don't we start with a clip? And Stanley, you want to set this up? I think this is at the start of the film.
Yeah, this is we're going to see 2 or 3 minutes, just a quick glimpse. And this is from the very beginning of the film, so there's not much to set up, so roll them.
Stanley, this is an hour-long film that was commissioned by Lincoln Center, and I think folks will have a chance to see the whole film, I think, later this year when it's released formally. But just to start, can you give us a sense for the scope of this film and what you're trying to do with it?
Yeah, the film really is centered on the years right before Lincoln Center was built, and then, well, the neighborhood. Going back, actually, but then the building of Lincoln Center and the destruction of what was called San Juan Hill, largely black and brown and poor white neighborhood, to build Lincoln Center. It's so amazing to actually see this clip and to be talking about it and look outside, because that's what was built. I mean, none of these buildings that you see out there were there. None of that was there. There was a viable and thriving neighborhood before Lincoln Center tore the neighborhood down to build Lincoln Center.
You born and raised New York City, longtime New Yorker, and you were born just a few years after I think San Juan Hill was razed. What was
I was actually born before.
Before. Right around that time. What kind of memory do you have? Did you interact with it? Did people talk about San Juan Hill? What was the idea of that when you were growing up in New York City at that time?
I mean, I actually could say I didn't know much about it, but I did attend high school for 1 year, exactly where we're sitting now. Commerce, then later it was called Brandeis when I was there. The 9th grade was like literally right here. Where I'm sitting, and some of the neighborhood was still intact.
Mm-hmm. The historical elements of this film are really stunning, and you've made very clear that San Juan Hill has played such an important role in America's historical and cultural memory, from the Charleston to West Side Story, all the way up to 1948 when it was razed to make way for Lincoln Center. And can you share with us some of the highlights of what you put into the film around the really vibrant cultural community that existed before Lincoln Center?
Yeah, I should say that, again, the film was commissioned by Lincoln Center. And one of the things that they were so great at saying to us is, we want to talk about the film, talk about the neighborhood before, what was here before, the thriving neighborhoods, the arts, the intellectuals that lived in the neighborhood. When we started the film, and we started talking to Lincoln Center, we thought, okay, well, when it gets boring, we'll just cut to a performance at Lincoln Center, and it'll be great. And they said, well, no, that's not really what we want. We really want to talk about the neighborhood and what it was before. And so that's the film we made.
Mm-hmm. And there's some pretty incredible names of folks who lived in this neighborhood and the descendants of whom are still in this neighborhood. Can you give us a sense for, who were some of these cultural bearers, artists, thinkers that were on this ground?
Yeah, I think it ended with a picture of Arthur Schomburg, and then Thelonious Monk, whose son is in the little clip that you saw, and he was kind of like the light of the neighborhood. He lived here, and he was actually already Thelonious Monk and famous, even though he lived in the neighborhood. And people remember him. And we talked to so many great people who just lived in the neighborhood, who were not famous, but just residents. And one of the things that really helped is Lincoln Center had already contacted a bunch of them, but when we started talking to them, a lot of them had stuck together and knew where people had spread out to and where they had been moved to. Because the vast majority of people were moved out of the neighborhood, and the neighborhood was then scattered.
And I appreciate you bringing us up to present day with clips from the original production of West Side Story all the way to Spielberg's recent adaptation, which incorporates the razing of San Juan Hill. Can you maybe talk a bit about bringing that piece of history into this film?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that people don't know is that West Side Story, the first West Side Story, was set in the neighborhood, in the backdrop of the Sharks and the Jets was San Juan Hill. They don't really talk about it as much, and in the Steven Spielberg version, they do talk about, it actually starts where this beautiful crane shot and of the destruction, and if you don't know what's happening, you kind of don't notice it because it happens. It's so beautiful, and you see the crane, the wrecking balls, and they're dancing on the rubble of their neighborhood. And one of the great things for us is Ariana DeBose, out of the blue, agreed to narrate the film. So that's kind of completing the circle.
Yeah, brought together. At the center of the film is an exploration of those migratory forces that transformed New York City's demographics, the Great Migration, Operation Bootstraps, and how these came into conflict with Robert Moses's vision for New York City, in 20th century forces of urban renewal. And, this is a narrative that unfortunately is very familiar to New Yorkers from many different boroughs. And can you talk a bit about how you wanted to tell the story of these large forces that came into conflict that ended up, sort of taking shape in this conflict between San Juan Hill and then eventually what came as Lincoln Center?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's so striking is that, it's the community kind of starts fighting back against the destruction of the neighborhood. And it's the community against John D. Rockefeller III, maybe the richest man in the world, Mayor Robert Wagner, who's the mayor of New York, and Robert Moses, who's kind of like Richard Nixon, like you can just say Robert Moses and the music starts to play, dun, 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 dun. And so, he was kind of evil. But what's really interesting is, in the clips, he just personifies that evil. He's just seems like a mean guy. And he was declared, I forgot the title, but he was like a head of slum clearance. And so then he could designate this area as a slum. And once you designated an area as a slum, then you could destroy it. You could tear it down because, it was all for the good. And this was all in the whole backdrop of the whole film is urban renewal, which is this kind of national idea, all over the cities all across the country is we'll tear down, and we have great, archival clips of, senators and others saying, that, there's a blight on the city and the black and brown neighborhoods just have to be torn down and the poor people have to be moved out, and that's the only way to succeed in changing this country. So it's all, it's all kind of there, and the archival is incredible.
I was really struck by this sort of cultural critical mass that had been created in San Juan Hill. There's part of the film, with the African American communities coming up from the South, Puerto Rican communities coming to New York City, and this nugget of history about the Black bohemia that existed here prior to the Harlem Renaissance. And maybe you can talk a bit about what you found in looking at that cultural critical mass, what that created, and maybe how we might see the legacy of that in New York City.
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting points that the former community members make is that because San Juan Hill was such a melting pot, it was a real vibrant neighborhood that when one artist, musician, shows us how, Thelonious Monk's music might have been influenced by his Puerto Rican neighbors and by the music of Puerto Rico, which was, he was hearing all the time. So there was this real, mix of people, like, the proverbial New York melting pot that existed here. And also it was a changeable neighborhood. So it wasn't one thing. San Juan Hill was something in 1890, it might have been white, and then 1910 it's black, and then in 1935, 1945 it's Puerto Rican, and then poor whites move in. So it was a changing neighborhood, but it was always a real neighborhood, and in many ways, not a slum, a poor neighborhood, but a vibrant neighborhood.
And when the plans were made to take down San Juan Hill, there was a lot of protest and a lot of advocacy to keep the neighborhood. And at the heart of the fight was a fight over culture. What culture is, who gets to define it, whose culture counts. And can you talk to us a bit more about how that fight took shape?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible fight, because the neighborhood, again, the people who live in the neighborhood who have no real political power, they're battling to kind of keep their neighborhood. And we have some incredible archival footage where they're marching, and they have signs that housing over culture, and they're just trying to fight. But again, they're fighting Rockefeller and Robert Moses and the mayor of New York, and so it's a kind of a losing battle from the first.
And there's these segments where, folks in the community there are saying, is not what we have here culture? Aren't we culture? And who's defining what culture should remain here? It's a really powerful statement. And, so this question over what culture counts and who defines culture is one that, sounds like today also. But I want to take a little bit of a pivot and ask you a bit about the work that you're doing on a broader level around that. This film is, I think interrogates that, but your work with Firelight Films and Firelight Media that you've been working with Marcia Smith on for many, many years has been doing the sort of pipeline infrastructure work to support BIPOC filmmakers to tell stories just like this, to tell stories that have been sort of left to the margins of the grand narratives. So maybe you can tell us a bit about, maybe we can connect the dots together around, the impulses you have to bring these histories to light, and also the larger sort of structural work that you're doing to support filmmakers to do that work too.
Yeah. So Firelight has two sections. So Firelight Films, which is the production arm, and so we produced this film, but Firelight Media, that really are artist services. And Firelight Media is celebrating its 25th year next year in existence, yeah, it's amazing. And our flagship program is the Directors Lab that we do with really first and second time filmmakers, and we mentor 10 to 15 filmmakers a year. So if you multiply that by 25, you'll understand how many people we've worked with, and it's been incredibly successful, but it's also been incredibly just wonderful for me and for Marcia to work with these great filmmakers. And the filmmakers that we work with, they're making their first and second film, and they've won every award that you can possibly have. 2 years ago, we were nominated for an Academy Award for Attica, and and one of our lab members was nominated also for the Academy Award for Ascension, a film called Ascension about China, and so we made up 40% of the nominees on the stage. So that was great.
It's a pretty incredible track record, and the diaspora of Firelight is everywhere and doing incredible work, and really, I think, at the center of independent documentary and journalism today. So again, if you want to support Firelight, the door is open.
Yeah, I mean, I think it becomes even more valuable as journalism, especially TV journalism becomes more, just people screaming at each other. and not real journalism. We have filmmakers who, documentary filmmakers who are really dedicated and are working on really, passionately on these projects and going into deep dives on stories and ways that TV news can't do anymore.
In building on the strand, to kind of broaden the frame, a defining characteristic of America is its ability to willfully forget its past for sake of progress, right? And when we know that progress in this country is so often come at great expense to those without power. And your filmmaking practice and your work at Firelight has consistently focused on bringing these histories up and nurturing the next generation of storytellers to bring up those stories. And I want to commend Lincoln Center for commissioning this film, because it's a very important set of questions to ask about an institution, what came before it, and to contend with a complicated history. And and there seems to be a growing understanding of the need to do this, certainly after 2020. And I'm curious, from your vantage, having made films for many years now, is there anything changing with how America is engaging with its past? It's a tricky terrain.
If you had asked me this 4 or 5 years ago, I would have said, yeah. There was this moment, what we call the George Floyd moment, and where America was, everybody was looking around and like, wait a minute. Am I a racist? Wait a minute. Are there any people of color working in our organization? But that, I'd say in some ways there's as so many happens so many times in this country, there's backlash. And now we in certain places in the country, as we all know, we can't teach it that enslavement even existed. So I think there's a backlash, but we're, I think, all in this room trying to fight the good fight. And, as I said before, we'll win.
And, one more question, and then I want to open it to the audience. We have a few minutes if there's any questions for Stanley. I realize folks have not seen the film yet, but I'm sure that there's a lot of questions you might ask Stanley about Firelight, about the creation of this film, etc. The film ends with a moment of possibility. And I'm not sure if you want to give away the ending, but it's something that's right here, this wall right here outside on Amsterdam. And it leaves with a sort of a question mark. There's plans to alter the campus of Lincoln Center to think about how it's going to engage with this past. And maybe you can talk a bit about wanting to end the film there and what that means.
Yeah, I think just a quick background. I mean, I think that so many New Yorkers haven't thought about this, or even people who visit Lincoln Center. But if you come in from Broadway, right, there's the beautiful open fountain, and the beautiful, if you go in on the evening, it's just a beautiful sight, But on this side, where the projects were, on the Amsterdam side, there's a wall. And there is no entrance to Lincoln Center on that wall. And Lincoln Center, to their credit, have plans to knock down some of the wall so there is an entrance. And then Lincoln Center is open to everybody. But that wall was, purposeful. They wanted to not be open to the community.
I want to take a minute and see if there's any questions out here. And there are microphones, I believe. Is that right? Okay, so let's take right here, and then we'll go over here. So here first.
Hi, I'm LaToya. My question is about Lincoln Center's and the collaboration of this all, especially from a journalistic perspective. I'm wondering how that influenced your storytelling. If it did, what challenges may have come up along the way, and if there was any point where you feel like it jeopardized how honest or maybe how critical you could be of the institution itself.
One of the things that happened was that Lincoln Center was very collaborative. They didn't, Lincoln Center more wanted us not to cover Lincoln Center, and, you know, like the performing arts part of Lincoln Center, you know, to cut to Aretha Franklin at Lincoln Center, or Leonard Bernstein, you know, or something that you know, they really wanted the story of San Juan Hill. So I think, and that was good, and that helped. I don't know. I think that they were very much, you know, tell the story, do what you want to do. Just be accurate. Just be accurate in the story. And again, partially, you know, it was made, you know, within this George Floyd moment where people were really looking at that themselves. And maybe, you know, some institutions will continue to do that. But we didn't feel constrained at all.
Over here.
Hugo Morales, trustee of the Rosenberg Foundation in San Francisco, California. Who owned the land and buildings in the neighborhood that was destroyed, and how did that play a role in the way it was, how would I say, well,
yeah, I can honestly say I don't know exactly, but I know that there's archival interview with some of the what they call slumlords. So I think they were owned by individuals, and I don't know kind of what the mechanism was to compensate them once their land was taken away and declared a slum. But it was owned by individuals.
Maybe we have time for one more question if there is.
Hi, fascinated by the urban renewal theme. That, of course, I'm from Chicago, and Chicago was a place where that happened across vast swaths of Black communities. And there's various efforts right now that are amplifying that. And I'm just wondering, if you could share anything, any takeaways from your research and your learning on urban renewal and how it played out across the country?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's one of those things where we look back and we say, what were we thinking exactly? But at the time, urban renewal was basically targeted at poor communities, especially poor Black communities, and so the poor Black communities didn't have a lot of power to resist. And the neighborhoods were like, see, this is a slum, and we're going to tear it down, and it will be better off, and we'll be better off. But if you look outside, I don't think that the people who were living in the projects, right, are living in those buildings. That's not what happened, and that's not what happened in Chicago and across the country. The neighborhoods were destroyed and then built up for people who could now afford to live in high-rises.
And before we wrap, Stanley, is there anything else that you'd like to share about this project or the process of making it?
Nah.
You've spoken already. The film's done.
It was a great experience for me personally. I mean, I did not know. I had heard of San Juan Hill. I didn't know, and just the process of talking to the community members. We interviewed a woman who's, I think she's like now 104 or something. She was 102 when we interviewed her, and just the process of talking to those people and being able to mine their memories and just it's always just an incredible gift and an honor to be able to talk to people and tell their stories.
Thank you, Stanley. And as